For thousands of years, the Galactic Concord had known peace. 7 great species, each with its own strengths and wisdom, ruled the galaxy together. They shared knowledge, resources, and a belief that they had conquered the darkness of space. War was a thing of the past, an ancient relic that no longer had a place in their society. The Morvani were elegant beings, their silver skin shimmering like moonlight. With the power to feel emotions, they believed that understanding could solve any conflict. The CTH, once fierce warriors, had not fought in 3,000 years. Their mighty warships now stood as monuments to their peaceful transformation. The crystalline Ven were ancient beings whose slow, deliberate thoughts provided guidance to all others. Alongside 4 other species, they formed a unified galaxy that thrived in peace. But in a corner of the galaxy lay the KTH exclusion zone, a place of dead space where no stars burned, no planets existed, and no ships returned. For 10,000 years, all the species of the Galactic Concord avoided this place, convinced that whatever lay there was best left undisturbed. That was until something came through from the void. Suddenly, alarms blared across 1,000 worlds, warning of a massive tear in the fabric of space. Something was coming. Something that would soon change everything. And then, from the darkness, a ship emerged. Unlike anything seen before, this ship was not beautiful like the Morvani vessels nor powerful like the warships of the CTH. It was battered, scarred, and looked as if it had been pieced together from countless broken parts. Its hull was marred with burn marks, and the ship's very presence seemed out of place in the galaxy. It shouldn't have been alive. For 6 hours, the ship drifted silently, and then came the message, a simple, haunting transmission that echoed across the galaxy. We are the last of Earth. The Devourers are 3 cycles behind us. Prepare yourselves. The message repeated, leaving everyone wondering what this Earth was and who these humans were. Ambassador Keithala of the Morvani was the first to respond. But her response was one of confusion. She had never heard of Earth, and the humans weren't listed anywhere in the galaxy's vast archives. The leaders of the Concord gathered in an emergency meeting. They debated fiercely. Some thought the humans were nothing more than a trick, perhaps pirates trying to frighten them. Others argued for communication, to learn more about these strange beings. In the middle of it all, one voice whispered of ancient stories, the Devourers, a force of destruction from the earliest records, long forgotten by most species. The arguments raged on, and the mysterious ship, the Prometheus, began to move again. It didn't head toward the Concord or away from it. Instead, it moved toward a field of dead asteroids, and there, small figures emerged from the ship, working tirelessly to repair the damaged vessel. They didn't ask for help. They didn't even ask for understanding. They simply worked. And as they did, Keithala made a bold decision: she would go to them. She would meet these humans face to face and find out the truth. What truths will Ambassador Keithala discover aboard the Prometheus? And what will this strange human crew reveal about their past, their struggle, and the terrifying force chasing them? Ambassador Keithala's shuttle docked with the battered ship. The airlock was thick with the smell of burnt metal and old sweat, a stark contrast to the pristine, almost sterile environment of the Concord ships. As Keithala stepped inside, she felt an overwhelming sense of despair. The Prometheus was a dying ship, and everything about it was wrong. The walls were narrow, and the warning lights blinked erratically. The whole vessel seemed as though it had been kept alive by sheer willpower. She walked through the dimly lit corridors, and soon, she encountered her first human. The being before her was unlike any creature she had ever seen. It stood on 2 legs, just like the Morvani, but its pale, scarred skin and hollow, exhausted eyes were unlike any of the species Keithala had ever met. This human, a woman, wore the heavy weight of survival on her face. I am Commander Ria Chen, the human introduced herself, her voice flat, carrying the weight of endless years of hardship. Welcome to what is left of humanity. Keithala felt a wave of empathy for this being, who seemed to have lost so much. The commander's eyes were dark with the burden of something unimaginable. There was no joy in them, only a tiredness that stretched beyond the physical. "How long have you been traveling?" Keithala asked, her voice cautious, yet filled with curiosity. 207 years, Commander Chen replied without hesitation. "Birth time." Keithala was stunned. She had never heard of a species surviving for such a period in such conditions. "That's impossible," she said. "No one could survive that long in space. The radiation, the isolation. How have you managed?" "We should be dead," Chen said flatly. "We've buried 6 generations on this ship. We've run out of food, medicine, hope, but we're still here because humans don't die easily." Keithala stood in silence. The air between them was thick with the weight of unspoken words. What kind of life could they have led? What had happened to their world, to their people? The commander led her through the ship, showing her the crew, only 47 humans, each one as tired and scarred as the ship itself. They worked without pause, repairing what they could, always preparing for the next battle. There was no time for rest. The Prometheus was a ship on the edge of survival, its crew equally close to the brink. "Your ship is badly damaged," Keithala observed, her voice filled with concern. "How long have you been in this state?" "We've been running for 200 years, Chen answered. "We've had to learn to survive, to grow food, to make medicine from nothing, but the real challenge is what's behind us. The Devourers." Keithala felt a chill run through her at the mention of the Devourers. The stories were ancient, whispers of an insatiable force, a creature so dangerous that it was considered a myth by most. But to see a human who had lived through it, it was more real than any legend. "We should have died," Commander Chen continued, her voice growing softer. "But we're still here. And we've been running ever since." Keithala followed the commander, trying to piece together the fragmented story of these humans. What had they faced? What had they lost? And why, after so much, had they come here, to the galaxy, to warn the Concord? As they reached the command center, Keithala saw it for the first time, the data screens, showing the galaxy, with small red dots slowly moving closer. The Devourers were coming. "What is that?" Keithala asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "The end," Chen replied simply, her voice tinged with a quiet dread. "The Devourers. They destroyed our sun, our planets, and now, they're chasing us. They're slow, but they'll never stop. They'll never forget. They are hunger. They are death. And they've been following us for centuries." Keithala felt the weight of her words settle in her chest. The galactic peace, the Concord's belief in invincibility, everything felt fragile now. What will Keithala do with this new, terrifying information? Will the Galactic Concord believe the humans and prepare for the Devourers, or will they continue to ignore the warnings? Back in the Galactic Concord, the message from the Prometheus stirred a storm of debates. The leaders of the 7 species gathered once again, but this time, there was more than curiosity in their eyes, there was fear. The Devourers had been a part of galactic lore, dismissed by most as nothing more than myth. But now, these humans, broken and scarred, had confirmed their existence, and it was impossible to ignore the chilling truth: the Devourers were real, and they were coming. High Commander VTH of the CRE Imperium, a massive, four-armed warrior with black iron-like scales, was the first to speak up. "This is a trick. A ploy to weaken us. We cannot be deceived. I say we destroy their vessel and be done with it. This is clearly the work of pirates or enemies trying to scare us into submission." The room fell silent as the other leaders listened intently, waiting for someone to challenge VTH's declaration. But none of them were eager to speak. There were too many unknowns. "Perhaps we should attempt communication," suggested Elder Thala of the KTH Collective. "It is better to understand who they are and what they want before we make any hasty decisions." A voice from the back echoed the ancient warning of the crystalline venerable, the Devourers, the Ancient One whispered, its voice a ringing bell. I have heard this name in the oldest stories from before our kind even learned to think. They are death. They are hunger. They are the end of all things. Commander VTH scoffed. Children's tales. Ghost stories meant to frighten the young. There is no such thing. But while the Concord argued, Ambassador Keithala had already made her decision. She would go to the Prometheus herself and learn the truth. She could feel the urgency in the human's message, and her instincts told her they were not lying. Will Keithala uncover the full extent of the human struggle? And will her decision to go aboard the Prometheus change the fate of the galaxy? Ambassador Keithala's shuttle sped toward the Prometheus once again, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew that the future of the galaxy might rest on what she would learn about these humans, but nothing could prepare her for what she was about to witness. As she stepped into the Prometheus once more, the stark contrast to the world of the Galactic Concord became even more evident. The ship, although functional, was a collection of patched-up parts held together by sheer willpower and determination. The humans aboard it were not the peaceful, graceful species of the Concord. They were tired. They were broken. But there was something else, something fierce, that radiated from them. These were survivors, not conquerors. Keithala followed Commander Ria Chen through the cramped hallways of the ship. They passed through the crew quarters, and Keithala's empathic senses picked up on the overwhelming weight of grief that hung over the humans. Each one had a story of loss, each one had fought for their lives, and each one had lived through things no being should ever experience. Yet, they worked without complaint, repairing their dying ship, preparing for the inevitable. How long do you think you can keep this ship alive? Keithala asked, her voice soft, as she tried to understand how they had managed to survive this long. Chen's eyes were tired but steady. We don't have much left, she replied. Every day is a fight for survival. We repair, we rebuild, and we wait. The devourers will find us eventually. And when they do, we'll fight. We always fight. Keithala was struck by the gravity in her words. How could these humans endure so much loss and still have the strength to keep going? And what would it take for the galaxy, united in peace for 12,000 years, to understand what these humans had learned through centuries of fear and death? They reached the bridge, where a new set of screens displayed alarming data. Red dots, once far off in the distance, were now moving closer, much faster than anyone had expected. The devourers were closing in, and with every passing moment, it became clear, the time for diplomacy was over. The time for action had arrived. Keithala turned to Chen, her heart heavy with the realization that nothing in the galaxy was ready for what was coming. We need to warn the Concord. We need to prepare. Chen nodded, her expression hardening. It won't be enough, she said simply. It's never enough. But we still have to try. What will Keithala's report mean for the Concord's readiness? Will the galaxy be able to put aside its differences and unite against the oncoming threat of the Devourers? Keithala returned to the Galactic Concord with news that none of the leaders wanted to hear. The Prometheus wasn't just a vessel lost in space, it was a symbol of humanity's desperate struggle for survival. And the warning it carried, about the approaching Devourers, was no longer something to dismiss. It was real. It was terrifying. And it was coming for them all. In the heart of the Concord's great hall, the leaders gathered again. But this time, there was no debate about whether or not the humans were a threat. Now the question was, what to do about the Devourers? High Commander VTH of the CRE Imperium spoke first, his voice tinged with disbelief. This cannot be, he said, his words firm. The Devourers were a myth. We have faced threats before, but nothing like this. I refuse to believe that this human ship could know more than our intelligence. I say we ignore it. If they come, we will crush them. But Elder Thala, the wise Morvani, spoke with the calmness of ages. What if it's true? What if the humans have survived this for centuries? What if the Devourers are real? The room fell into uneasy silence as the other leaders exchanged looks. None of them were ready to believe it. After all, they had known peace for over 12 millennia. War was something of the past, an ancient fear. It was hard to accept that something like the Devourers could be real. "I suggest we send a team to investigate," Thala said, her silver eyes scanning the room. "We can't ignore the warning. We owe it to our people to find out the truth." "I agree," said Ambassador Ferris of the Venerable, "the truth could save billions. We must know if the Devourers are truly coming. And if they are, we must know how to fight them." But Commander VTH wasn't convinced. "If they are real, we will fight them in our own way. We do not need help from these humans. The Concord is strong enough to stand on its own." The leaders debated for hours, but as the meeting wore on, it became clear that they were not prepared to face the reality of the situation. Some were still in denial, unwilling to accept that the galaxy's peace could be shattered. Others, like the Morvani, understood that they had no choice but to prepare for what was coming. In the end, nothing changed. The debate continued, but no action was taken. The Concord remained divided. And on the Prometheus, Commander Chen and her crew continued to repair their dying ship, preparing for the inevitable. How much longer will the Concord's leaders remain divided? Can humanity's warning break through the galaxy's complacency before it's too late? The days following Keithala's report were tense. The Concord's leaders continued to argue, each species pulling in different directions. Some believed the warning, while others refused to believe that their galaxy, so secure, so powerful, could ever fall to such a threat. Meanwhile, on the Prometheus, Commander Chen continued her tireless work. With each passing day, she could feel the weight of time pressing down on her ship and her crew. There were only 47 humans left. The toll of survival had drained them all, but they refused to give up. Their fight was not just for survival, it was for the future of the galaxy, a future that had not yet realized how dire things were. Keithala found herself drawn back to the Prometheus, spending more time aboard the human vessel. She saw their resilience up close, humans who had lost everything but still worked, still pushed forward. Each of them carried a story of hardship. There was Jin, who had lost his family to the Devourers. There was Kira, born on the ship, who had never seen Earth, but had fought for every breath of life. Each of them had a fire in their eyes. A fire that refused to die. "Why do you keep going?" Keithala asked one night, sitting across from Commander Chen in the ship's mess hall. The humans had little food left, but still, they shared what they had, never complaining. "Because we have no choice," Chen replied quietly. "We've lost everything, but we're still here. And we're still fighting. Maybe not for ourselves anymore, but for the future. For the galaxy. Maybe someday, someone will listen." Keithala didn't have an answer. She didn't know if the galaxy was ready to listen. But she hoped. And that hope grew stronger with each day she spent with the humans aboard the Prometheus. Will the galaxy's leaders finally listen to the humans' warning? And when the Devourers arrive, will they be ready for the fight of their lives? The waiting was unbearable. Keithala continued her visits to the Prometheus, seeing firsthand how the humans lived on the edge of survival. She watched them, their tired faces, their empty eyes, yet there was a drive, a raw, unshakable determination in them that she had never seen before. For a species that had been running for 2 centuries, they had not lost their will to fight. The humans had suffered unimaginable losses, and yet they remained standing, still fighting. One evening, as Keithala was walking through the narrow corridors of the ship, she overheard a conversation between Commander Chen and one of her officers. The officer was clearly worried, her voice tight with anxiety. "Commander, the Devourers have adapted. They're getting closer. Much closer. If they reach us, we won't make it." Chen's response was calm, as always, but there was a sadness in her voice. "We already know that. But we can't give up. Not now. We must hold on long enough for the galaxy to prepare. We've made it this far. That's something. Keithala had heard enough. She turned back to the crew quarters, feeling a deep sorrow for the humans aboard this ship. They had been running for so long, and now, with the Devourers approaching, their fate seemed sealed. Yet, there was still that spark in their eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished. In the meantime, the Concord's leaders had still not reached a consensus. Some were still skeptical. They argued that humanity's struggle was theirs to fight alone, that the Concord's peace should not be disrupted by fear. But Keithala could not shake the truth she had learned on the Prometheus. The galaxy was not ready for what was coming. It had grown too comfortable in its peaceful existence. It had forgotten the harshness of the universe beyond its borders. And then, without warning, the galaxy's sensors lit up. The Devourers were no longer a distant threat. They were here. At first, it was only a faint signal, a disturbance in the fabric of space. But as it grew closer, the full scale of the approaching danger became clear. The Devourers were no longer mere stories. They were real, and they were coming fast. Keithala wasted no time. She sent a message to the Concord's leaders, urging them to mobilize. The time for debate was over. The time to act had come. But when the leaders convened, it was too late. The first strike from the Devourers hit. The war had begun. With the first strike from the Devourers, will the Concord be able to unify in time? Or will they continue to fight amongst themselves, letting the galaxy fall to destruction? The first battle was swift, brutal, and devastating. The Devourers arrived in a wave, a tide of metallic creatures that moved like a singular consciousness, each one perfectly coordinated. Their strength was not in their numbers alone, but in their unity. They were not a mere army, they were a force of nature. The CRE Imperium, confident in their power, were the first to engage. Their fleet, the largest and most formidable in the galaxy, deployed all its weapons, hurling plasma beams, missiles, and energy blasts into the swarm. But nothing worked. The Devourers absorbed the attacks, their numbers growing with every strike. What had once seemed like a distant threat now loomed large, overwhelming the fleet's defenses. High Commander VTH stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unconquerable, watching the chaos unfold. His voice was steady, but the fear was undeniable. Increase firepower. Focus on the center of the swarm, he commanded. The fleet's weapons lit up the sky, tearing through the Devourers in a desperate attempt to stop them. For a moment, it seemed like the swarm might slow. But then, the unimaginable happened. The Devourers began to eat. They didn't fight back with weapons or shields. They didn't need to. They simply landed on the CRE warships, and with one touch, they began to dissolve the metal. Ships crumbled, and entire sections of the fleet were consumed in moments. The CRE warriors, who had once been proud of their strength, now found themselves helpless. Fall back. VTH ordered, his voice cracking. All ships, retreat. But it was too late. The Devourers consumed everything in their path, and within minutes, the CRE fleet was destroyed. The Unconquerable itself was reduced to a mass of melted metal and screaming crew members. Keithala, watching from the Prometheus, felt her heart sink. The Devourers were not just a threat, they were unstoppable. Across the galaxy, the other species watched in horror as the first battle ended in complete annihilation. The Concord, which had stood for over 12,000 years, was now on the brink of collapse. On the Prometheus, Commander Chen remained silent, her eyes glued to the data streaming in from the battle. It was the same as before. The Devourers always won the first battle. They always would. Will the other species of the Concord be able to recover from such a devastating loss? Or will they crumble under the pressure of the unstoppable Devourers? In the aftermath of the CRE Imperium's destruction, the galaxy was in chaos. The Devourers were not just attacking, they were consuming everything in their path. And now, the galaxy's most powerful fleet was gone. The leaders of the Concord, once united in peace, found themselves divided in the face of an enemy they couldn't understand. The Morvani retreated to their home worlds, unwilling to engage in direct conflict. They were pacifists, and the thought of fighting was abhorrent to them. But they weren't ready to let the Devourers consume their people. Instead, they fortified their own planets, pulling back from the wider conflict. The crystalline Ven, too, withdrew, silent for the first time in history. They had long advised peace and diplomacy, but now, faced with annihilation, their role in the galaxy seemed uncertain. The humans, however, had no such luxury. They had been running for 2 centuries, and they had learned what it meant to survive. The Prometheus became a symbol not just of resistance, but of defiance. Commander Chen and her crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the next battle, teaching what they had learned through years of fleeing, fighting, and surviving. Keithala watched the humans, seeing something in them she had never expected. They fought with everything they had, but it wasn't just their survival they were concerned with. They fought for the galaxy, for the future of every species. They had lost everything, but they had not given up. And now, as the Devourers closed in, the galaxy would need that same spirit if it hoped to survive. How long can the galaxy hold on, divided between fear and hope? Can the humans teach the Concord how to fight back against the Devourers before it's too late? As the galaxy descended into chaos, the Prometheus remained a steadfast beacon of resilience. Commander Chen and her crew continued to work, repairing their ship with whatever they could salvage, preparing for a battle that would likely be their last. But the humans did not falter. They were tired, exhausted, even, but their resolve was unshaken. Keithala, now spending more time aboard the ship, began to understand something deeper about humanity. These beings had lived through 2 centuries of constant terror. They had seen their world fall, their people scattered, and their survival depend on their ability to adapt and fight in the harshest conditions. It wasn't just about the physical fight, they had fought for their very humanity. How do you keep going? Keithala asked Commander Chen one evening, watching as she coordinated repairs on the ship's failing systems. Chen paused for a moment, wiping her brow, the exhaustion clear on her face. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her expression was filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. When Earth fell, she began, her voice steady but full of pain, there were 12 Ark ships. 12 chances for humanity to survive. We watched as one by one, they were destroyed. We thought we would be next. The last one was destroyed 60 years ago. Keithala's heart tightened at the weight of those words. To survive after losing so much, to continue when hope had long since faded, it was almost unimaginable. But we didn't die, Chen continued. We didn't die, because humans don't know how to give up. You just focus on the next hour, the next repair, the next breath. That's all we've got left. Keithala nodded, feeling something stirring within her, a newfound respect for these humans who had lived through hell and still held on. Their stubbornness, their refusal to accept death, it was not just a survival mechanism. It was a force that could change the galaxy. As the Prometheus moved ever closer to the inevitable confrontation, Keithala began to see that perhaps the greatest lesson humanity could offer was not in their weapons or tactics, but in their unwavering spirit. It was something the galaxy had lost. The 7 species had grown complacent in their peace. The humans, on the other hand, had learned that survival wasn't a choice, it was a fight. And now, that fight was coming for them all. Can the human stubbornness and resolve teach the Concord the true meaning of survival? Will they be able to unify in time to face the Devourers? As the Devourers continued their relentless march across the galaxy, the leaders of the Galactic Concord were forced to make a choice. The first battle had been a disaster. The CRE Imperium's greatest fleet had been wiped out in mere minutes, and now, panic was spreading across the galaxy. The Morvani had pulled back, and the Ven had gone silent. But the humans, despite their losses, continued to fight on. In the war room of the Galactic Concord Central Station, the leaders gathered for what would be their most important meeting. Keithala stood at the front, flanked by Commander Chen, who had insisted on attending despite the toll the journey had taken on her body. She was thin, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes still burned with the fire of someone who had refused to give up. "We need to make a decision," Keithala said, her voice firm. "The Devourers are coming. They've already destroyed one fleet. Soon, they'll be at our doorstep. We can't afford to keep debating. We need to unite, now, or it will be too late." High Commander VTH of the CRE Imperium scowled, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. "The Devourers are a threat, yes. But we cannot simply surrender our sovereignty. We are the greatest military power in the galaxy. We don't need these humans." "You do," Chen interrupted, her voice cold and sharp, cutting through the commander's words. "The Devourers do not care about your fleets. They do not care about your weapons or your armies. They are an unstoppable force, and you will fall to them just like the rest of us will, unless we work together." VTH sneered at her, but he could not deny the truth of her words. He knew it as well as she did. The Prometheus had survived because the humans had learned to adapt. They had fought not with brute force, but with creativity and desperation. It was the only reason they were still alive. "We need to adapt, too," Chen continued. "The way we fight, the way we think, everything needs to change. If we don't act now, it will be too late." The room fell into tense silence. For the first time, the leaders of the Galactic Concord began to understand what the humans had learned over 200 years of fleeing and fighting. The Devourers weren't an enemy you could defeat with strength alone. You needed to outthink them, outlast them. The galaxy had to unite, not just in battle, but in spirit. "I agree with Commander Chen," Elder Thala said softly. "We have been too complacent. We need to learn to fight again, but we must do it together." The others were still hesitant, but Keithala could see the shift in their eyes. The decision had been made. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but they were finally starting to understand the true meaning of unity in the face of annihilation. Will the Concord finally unite, or will their internal struggles lead to their doom? Can the combined strength of all species be enough to face the Devourers? The days grew shorter as the Devourers closed in. The Galactic Concord had finally come together, but it was not the grand fleet that they had once envisioned. Instead, it was a haphazard alliance of species, each contributing their unique strengths in the hope that it might be enough to stand against the Devourers. On the Prometheus, Commander Chen and her crew trained tirelessly, teaching the other species the tactics that had kept them alive for so long. They showed the Morvani how to sense the Devourers' movements, how to predict where the swarm would strike next. They taught the CRE how to fight without pattern, how to create chaos that would confuse the enemy. The Venn resonators provided a way to disrupt the coordination of the Devourers, giving the fleets a chance to strike back. The battle plans were far from perfect, but they were all they had. The alliances between species, once shaky, had now solidified. The fleets, although smaller and less powerful than the CRE Imperium's massive armada, were now united, their tactics more unpredictable, more versatile. They had learned that survival didn't depend on power, it depended on adaptation. And now, the time had come. The Devourers were upon them. The final battle for the galaxy was about to begin. The Prometheus led the charge, with the combined fleets of the Galactic Concord following behind. Chen stood at the command center, watching the battle unfold. The Devourers were every bit as terrifying as they had been warned, but this time, the galaxy was ready. The swarm moved like a living wave, but the fleets, guided by the humans' chaotic strategies and the combined strength of the species, fought back with everything they had. As the battle raged, Keithala felt something she had never experienced before: hope. The odds were still slim, but the galaxy was fighting. They were standing their ground. The Devourers might not be defeated today, but the galaxy was no longer running. With the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, will the combined forces of the Concord and the humans be enough to stop the Devourers? Or will the galaxy fall to the insatiable hunger of the swarm? The battle was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The Devourers moved with terrifying precision, their vast numbers making them nearly impossible to defeat. But the combined fleets of the Galactic Concord, though smaller and less experienced, fought with an intensity born of desperation. They had no choice but to adapt, to break every rule they had ever followed, and to fight as one. Commander Chen's voice echoed through the command center of the Prometheus as she gave the orders. Keep them off the Ven ships. Hold the line. We're not retreating, this ends here. The Prometheus, battered and barely holding together, led the charge, its ragged hull scarred by countless battles. It wasn't the strongest ship in the fleet, but it was the heart of the human resistance. Chen had learned long ago that survival wasn't about being the strongest, it was about being the hardest to kill. Keithala stood at her side, watching the battle unfold. She could feel the tension in the air, could hear the frantic commands from every ship as the fleets danced around the Devourer's deadly swarm. The Ven resonators disrupted sections of the swarm, confusing the Devourers for a moment, but the creatures adapted quickly. The Ciari warriors, once so proud of their discipline, now fought without order, relying on chaos and unpredictability to gain the upper hand. The humans were everywhere, working in unison with the other species, showing them how to fight in ways they had never imagined. Their tactics were wild, reckless even, but they worked. Every time a ship was struck down, another human would step forward and make the sacrifice that created an opening for their allies. It was madness, but it was their way of fighting. The swarm was a force of nature, but the humans had learned to survive by thinking outside the rules of war. Still, the Devourers were relentless. They adapted faster than anything the Concord had faced. Their numbers seemed endless, their hunger insatiable. Keithala's heart pounded in her chest as the swarm inched closer, threatening to overwhelm the fleet. Then, amid the chaos, Chen's voice broke through the comms. I've got an idea. It's a long shot, but it's our only chance. Keithala turned to her, eyes wide. What do you mean? Chen looked at her, her expression hardening. I've been studying the Devourers for over 2 centuries. I know how they think. I know how they work. But we've missed something. They're not invincible. They have a weakness. And I'm going to find it. Keithala felt a chill run through her. What are you planning? Chen smiled grimly. I'm going to give them a signal, something they can't ignore. A signal that disrupts their hive mind. Keithala's eyes widened in realization. But that's dangerous. You can't. Chen didn't wait for her to finish. She turned and ran toward the ship's core, where the communication array was located. Keithala followed her, but by the time she reached the room, it was already too late. Chen was connecting herself to the neural interface, preparing to transmit the signal directly into the Devourer's network. No! Keithala shouted, but it was too late. The scream that came from Chen was not human. It was pure agony, as if her very mind was being torn apart. Keithala watched in horror as the human commander's body convulsed, blood pouring from her eyes, ears, and nose. She was sacrificing herself to send a signal that might save the galaxy, but at an unimaginable cost. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The Devourers hesitated. They halted in midair, disoriented and confused, as if they had lost their connection to their hive mind. The fleets of the Galactic Concord struck in that instant, using every weapon at their disposal. The humans, the Morvani, the CRE, and the Ven, every species fought as one. The attack was furious and relentless. For the first time, the Devourers were not winning. Chen's body collapsed, her mind shattered by the connection, but the signal had gone through. The swarm faltered, breaking into chaos. And in that moment, the galaxy's fleets attacked with all their might, pushing the Devourers back. Will the fleets be able to defeat the Devourers now that their hive mind has been disrupted? Can humanity's sacrifice turn the tide of the battle? The battle raged on, but the tides were beginning to shift. The Devourers, momentarily disoriented by the signal from Chen, began to falter. The combined fleets of the Galactic Concord, now united in a way they never had been before, pressed forward with everything they had. Every ship, every soldier, every warrior, human and alien alike, fought as one. It was a battle like no other. The Devourers had always been a force of nature, moving without pattern, consuming everything in their path. But now, the galaxy species were fighting back in a way they never had before. They fought with creativity, with unpredictability, with chaos. And for the first time in history, they were winning. Yet even as the Devourers began to retreat, Keithala knew that the war was far from over. The victory they had just achieved was hard-won, but it was only a temporary reprieve. The Devourers were not defeated, only delayed. They would return. And the galaxy would need to be ready. As the battle began to wind down, Keithala rushed to the Prometheus, desperate to find Chen. When she arrived, she found the human commander unconscious, her body battered and broken from the strain of the neural interface. "She's alive," the doctor said quietly. "But it's a miracle. She shouldn't have survived that." Keithala sat by Chen's bedside, watching as the human slept, her chest rising and falling in a labored rhythm. The room was quiet, the battle outside fading into the distance. The war was not over. But for the first time in a long time, Keithala felt a glimmer of hope. Humans had taught the galaxy how to fight, but they had also taught them something more important: how to survive. It wasn't about winning every battle. It was about never giving up, no matter the odds. And as long as humanity was in the fight, the galaxy had a chance. Will the humans be able to recover from their sacrifice? And when the Devourers return, will the galaxy be ready to finish what they started? Months passed, and the galaxy slowly began to rebuild. The Devourers had retreated, but their return was inevitable. The question was no longer whether they would come, but when. And when they did, the galaxy would be ready. The Prometheus had been decommissioned, its crew scattered to new ships and roles across the United Fleet. Commander Chen, though still weak from her ordeal, had become a symbol of human perseverance. She had lost everything, yet she had never stopped fighting. She had given the galaxy a chance, and now it was time for the galaxy to take that chance. Keithala stood on a small moon, looking up at the stars. The galaxy was different now. The war was still coming, but the galaxy had learned something important: it had learned how to stand together. Beside her stood Chen, now older, her body weakened, but her spirit still unbroken. "We're ready," Chen said softly, her voice full of quiet strength. "We've been ready for a long time." Keithala nodded. "This time, we fight together. All of us." The stars burned bright above them, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy knew what it meant to fight for something bigger than themselves. The true enemy was still out there. The darkness between galaxies would come, and it would be a threat unlike anything they had ever faced. But now, the galaxy was ready. They had learned from the humans how to survive, how to adapt, and how to hope. And when the darkness arrived, they would face it as one. For the first time in a long time, there was hope in the galaxy. A new dawn had begun. And humanity had shown them the way. End of story. Let this message ignite your faith, rekindle your hope, and spur you to stand firm on your journey. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story stirred your heart, drop a like, share this video with someone who needs it, and hit that subscribe button to catch more content like this. May God's blessings overflow in your life, and I'll see you soon.